The rain wouldn't stop that night, as if the sky itself was mourning. In a small hospital ICU room, dimly lit by flickering monitors, a young nurse named Alina stood silently, her hands trembling, her eyes locked onto the fragile body of a child, barely breathing. The room smelled of antiseptic and heartbreak, but it wasn't the child's suffering alone that made Alina's heart race. It was the name she had just dialed. That number wasn't meant to be called by people like her. It belonged to Raymond Kane, the CEO of a billion-dollar tech empire, a man surrounded by bodyguards, boardrooms, and boundaries. He was untouchable, until Alina broke protocol and whispered the unthinkable into her phone. "Sir, you need to come to ICU room 9. Now. It's urgent. It's about Mia." Her voice cracked as she spoke the child's name. There was a pause, long enough to feel eternal, and then she heard a breath on the other end that didn't sound like power. It sounded like fear. Raymond didn't ask questions. He simply said, "I'm on my way." And the line went dead. Alina's fingers dropped the phone as her body slumped into the corner. She wasn't supposed to get involved. She wasn't supposed to care. But this child had changed everything. Mia had come in 3 nights ago. No name, no guardian, just a handwritten note folded tightly into her hospital gown. "Please, save her. She's all I have." She had bruises, a shattered rib, and eyes too wise for someone so small. Alina had seen hundreds of patients, but something about Mia felt personal. The child clung to her hand like she knew she could trust her, like she'd been waiting her whole life for someone not to walk away. Every night since, Alina had stayed late without pay, feeding Mia soup, adjusting her oxygen, whispering stories of princesses who survived impossible storms. But tonight, Mia had stopped responding. Her vitals were fading fast, and the doctors whispered terms like multi-organ failure and not much time. That's when Alina had found the file, a sealed envelope tucked in with Mia's blood work. Inside, a birth certificate and the father's name. Raymond Kane. The same Raymond who stood on magazine covers with cold eyes and a perfect smile. The same Raymond who once said in an interview, "Emotions are distractions. Success requires focus." The father of a dying girl he didn't know existed. Alina's hands shook as she stared at the certificate, then at Mia. She couldn't let this child die without someone holding her hand who should have never let go in the first place. When Raymond entered the hospital, the air changed. Suits rushed to make space. Security flanked him like shadows, and yet his face betrayed a man lost. He didn't ask for directions. He seemed to already know where to go, like something in his chest had pulled him there. The moment he stepped into the ICU room, everything stopped. Even the machines sounded quieter. He looked at the bed, then at the girl, then at Alina. "Who is she?" he asked, but he already knew. His voice cracked in a way that no investor call ever could. Alina stepped back as he approached the bed slowly, eyes wide, knees buckling. "Mia," he whispered, and the room went silent except for the quiet hum of life slipping away. His knees hit the floor with a dull thud as he collapsed beside the bed, not from the weight of shock, but from guilt, decades worth. He didn't remember the woman from years ago. She was a mistake, a fling, someone his lawyers paid to disappear. But this child, this beautiful, broken child, she was real. And he had missed her entire life. Tears streamed down his face, uncontrolled, as he gripped Mia's hand. "I didn't know. I swear to God, I didn't know." He kept repeating the words like they could rewind time, but Alina had heard them before, from fathers who woke up too late, from mothers who ran back after walking away. She wanted to hate him. But in that moment, all she saw was a man who had finally found the part of himself he buried with his conscience. Doctors entered. The heart monitor beeped faster. Something was happening. A miracle or a farewell. They weren't sure. But Raymond didn't let go of Mia's hand. Even as the machines surrounded her, he stayed. He prayed. For the first time in his life, Raymond Kane begged, not for stock, not for deals, but for a second chance. And then, Mia opened her eyes. Mia had been silent for most of her life, even before the bruises and broken bones. She'd learned to survive without words, without asking for help, like a ghost trapped in a body too small to hold the weight of its own pain. At just 7 years old, she had witnessed things that no child ever should. A house once filled with laughter now echoed with the sounds of shouting, slamming doors, and the constant hum of fear that lived in the walls. Her mother, desperate to protect her, had tried to shield Mia from the worst. But the system had failed them both. The bruises on Mia's arms weren't from playful falls or accidents. They were from a father who never learned how to love and a mother who couldn't escape his grasp. The note Mia had written in the hospital gown was a cry for help, but it wasn't just for herself. It was for her mother, too. The woman who loved her enough to send her to the hospital, hoping for a better life. Alina had known from the moment she first saw Mia that there was something pure, something untouched, about her. The way Mia clutched her hand every time Alina entered the room was a reminder of all the things she had never had. Safety, love, warmth. Despite the tragedy she carried with her, Mia never let go of hope. She still believed that someone out there could make it better. And Alina wasn't sure if she was worthy of that trust. But she wasn't going to walk away. As the days passed in the ICU, Alina found herself growing more and more attached. She'd stay longer than she was supposed. 2, feeding Mia soup, holding her hand while the child fought through fevers and nightmares. Alina would talk to her softly, even though she knew Mia couldn't respond. "You're so strong," she'd whisper. "You're going to get through this. You're a fighter." Mia would blink up at her with wide, innocent eyes that spoke volumes without a single word. It was a look of someone who had been through so much pain, but still had so much hope. It made Alina's heart ache. How could a child with so much hurt still hold on to so much innocence? It was a question that haunted her. She knew the world wasn't kind, especially to children who couldn't protect themselves. And Mia's innocence was both a blessing and a curse. But Mia wasn't just a child who needed saving. She was a reminder of the innocence that people like Raymond had forgotten. In his world of suits and meetings, he had forgotten what it was like to trust freely, to look at the world with the hope that a mother would have for her child, and the belief that love could heal anything. Mia reminded Alina of what Raymond had lost, and what he might still be able to find. When Raymond first entered the room, he didn't see a child. He saw a broken past. His past. The part of him he had buried so deep that he couldn't even recognize it until it was too late. When his eyes fell on Mia's frail body, something inside of him cracked. The little girl who once held so much innocence was now just another victim of a world he had helped build, one where money and power overshadowed the things that really mattered, like love, care, and responsibility. Alina watched from the corner, holding her breath as she saw the great CEO crumble. The man who commanded boardrooms, who dictated the direction of entire industries, who could make or break lives with a single decision. He collapsed on the floor, tears rolling down his face as he clutched Mia's small, cold hand. He wasn't a powerful businessman in that moment. He was a father, a man who had failed. Mia, the fragile girl with the face of a lost angel, had already begun to teach Raymond a lesson that no one had ever dared to teach him before. That innocence, once lost, could never be reclaimed. And Mia wasn't just any innocent child. She was a child who had already given up her innocence to the cruel world around her, only to hold on to the last thing she could: hope. But now even hope was beginning to fade. Alina could feel it, a weight in the air that was becoming harder to ignore. Mia's breath was shallow, her heartbeat slow. The innocence she had clung to, that one small light in her eyes, was starting to flicker. But it was in this moment of despair that something shifted within Raymond. As his tears fell, a realization hit him like a wave. He hadn't just failed as a father, he had failed as a human being. And this tiny, innocent child had become the embodiment of everything he had turned his back on. The humanity he had forgotten in his pursuit of power. And in that moment, as he held her hand and promised her silently that he would not let her go, the man who had built empires was now on his knees, begging for a chance to be something better. For himself, for Mia, and for the child he hadn't known he had. As Raymond knelt beside Mia's bed, his hands trembling as he held her frail hand, a deep, suffocating silence filled the room. The beeping of the heart monitor was the only sound that seemed to matter. It echoed in his chest, louder with every passing second, and for the first time in years, he found himself unable to hide behind his wealth, power, or pride. All of those things, the very things that had defined his identity for decades, felt meaningless in this moment. He had built his empire on the backs of people like Mia, people who were overlooked, forgotten, and cast aside in a world that valued success and material wealth above all else. In boardrooms, Raymond had crushed competitors, made decisions that impacted thousands, and amassed more money than he could ever spend. He had lived his life believing that success was the ultimate goal, that power, influence, and money were the only markers of worth. But as he looked down at Mia, at the fragile little girl whose entire life had been filled with pain, abandonment, and loneliness, something shifted inside of him. Mia was a mirror to everything he had become. She was his lost innocence, his forgotten conscience, the very soul he had abandoned in his pursuit of success. He could see it in the way she had clung to life despite everything, the way she still believed in love, trust, and hope, even when the world had shown her nothing but cruelty. The realization hit him like a tidal wave, a jarring truth that he had been running from his entire life. Success without empathy is a hollow victory. It didn't matter how many companies he owned, how many billions he controlled, or how many homes he lived in. He had neglected the things that truly mattered: human connection, love, and responsibility. Mia, with her bruised body and broken spirit, had lived a life of innocence stolen by the very world he had created. Her mother, too, had been a casualty of his type of success, someone forced to live in fear, to compromise her own dignity just to survive. It was Raymond's success that had perpetuated a system where children like Mia were born into suffering, where power was used to control, to oppress, and to ignore the needs of the vulnerable. In the sterile silence of the ICU, Raymond found himself at a crossroads. The weight of his realization crushed him. How had he become this man? The man who ignored the cries for help, who valued his business deals more than human lives, who saw people as nothing more than assets to be used and discarded. He had forgotten what it meant to be human, to care, to protect, to truly be there for someone in need. As he sat there, holding Mia's hand, tears welled in his eyes. He wasn't just crying for her. He was crying for himself, for all the lost years, for the countless mistakes he couldn't undo. He had been so focused on building a life of success that he had neglected to build a life of meaning. In a quiet, almost reverent voice, Raymond whispered the words that would change him forever. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry I failed you, all of you." Alina, standing in the corner of the room, watched the man who had once been untouchable crumble before her. She had seen it before, men like Raymond who never knew how to apologize, never knew how to truly change. But this was different. There was something raw, something real in his apology. The apology wasn't just for Mia, but for the world he had helped create, for all the harm he had inflicted without realizing it. Raymond had spent his entire life surrounded by people who only cared about what he could do for them, about how he could help them climb higher. He had never been forced to see the real consequences of his actions, never had to look into the eyes of someone who had been damaged by his negligence. But here, in this room, as he sat beside the broken child he had unknowingly fathered, he saw it all clearly. The road to redemption would not be paved with money or business deals. It would require him to change his very nature, to put others before himself, and to be accountable for the harm he had caused. "I'm going to make it right," Raymond promised, though he knew the journey ahead would be long and difficult. "I'll make sure no child has to live like this again. I swear it." Alina didn't know whether to believe him. She had seen too many men like Raymond promise change and deliver nothing. But there was something in his voice, in his eyes, that told her this wasn't just another empty promise. The man she had seen step into that room, arrogant and cold, was now a man who understood the weight of his actions. He had felt the heavy burden of his own guilt, and for the first time, he was willing to carry it. Mia's condition worsened, her little chest struggling to rise and fall. But as Raymond held her hand, he didn't just see a child fading away. He saw a life that had been stolen, a future that had been denied, and a man who had been given a chance to change the world, even if only by saving one life. Mia may have been slipping away, but in her brief time in this world, she had achieved what many adults never could. She had made Raymond see the truth, had opened his heart, and had shown him the path to redemption. Mia had given him the clarity he needed to reclaim his humanity, and in that moment, Raymond promised himself that he would spend the rest of his life making sure Mia's story wasn't one of tragedy, but of inspiration, hope, and change. The ICU room was thick with the weight of a moment that could not be reversed. The heart monitor beeped in steady, slow intervals, each sound growing further apart, as if it was counting down to something final. Raymond had not moved from his spot by Mia's side. His hands, once so accustomed to commanding boardrooms, were now cradling the fragile, tiny hand of the child he barely knew. There were no grand gestures, no words of redemption that could undo the past. In this room, there were no business deals to be made, no profits to be gained. Just a man kneeling beside the little girl whose life he had unknowingly shattered, holding on to her as if his touch could save her. His breath was ragged, shaky, and for the first time in his life, Raymond felt utterly powerless. Mia's small face was pale, her breathing shallow, every rise and fall of her chest more labored than the last. Her body was covered with the remnants of a life filled with neglect and abuse. Yet despite it all, her eyes remained wide open, staring at him, not with judgment, but with the unimaginable innocence of a child who had never learned how to hate. In that moment, everything Raymond had believed about strength, success, and control came crashing down. His tears fell, soft but steady, each one feeling like a revelation, a painful but necessary cleansing of the man he had been. He didn't even realize he was crying until a sob broke free from his chest, jagged and raw. He had built his empire, but never once had he felt the weight of real emotion. Now, as he looked into Mia's eyes, he saw everything he had forsaken, everything he had buried under the illusion of success. "Mia," he whispered, his voice breaking as if it could barely handle the gravity of what he was saying. "I'm so sorry. I never knew. I never knew I had a daughter. I never knew." He choked on his words, unable to finish the sentence. There was so much he wanted to say, so much he wanted to apologize for, but it all felt so insignificant in the face of the truth staring back at him. There was no way to rewind time, no way to undo the hurt, the neglect, the abandonment. He couldn't undo the years he'd missed. But the guilt of knowing he was the cause of all of it was unbearable. The silence in the room seemed to stretch forever. Alina watched, a quiet observer to the transformation unfolding in front of her. She had seen her share of broken men, men who claimed they could change, men who wanted to be better but were too afraid to do the hard work. But this was different. Raymond wasn't speaking out of obligation. He wasn't performing for anyone. His tears were real, and for a moment, the weight of the world shifted. The mighty CEO, the man who had built his empire on control, on cold logic, was now reduced to something entirely human, vulnerable, lost, and full of regret. It was a side of him that no one had ever seen. It was a side that Alina had only dreamed of, a man who was finally waking up to the consequences of his own actions. Mia, her tiny body trembling, lifted her hand weakly, as if sensing Raymond's grief. She could barely move, but the innocence in her eyes never wavered. She didn't need his money or his apologies. She didn't need grand promises or elaborate words. All Mia needed, all any child in her situation needed, was love, a love that had been missing for so long. In the stillness of that room, as Raymond gently clasped her hand, he felt something within him crack open. It was as if the wall he had spent decades building around his heart had finally crumbled. He wasn't the invincible CEO anymore. He wasn't the man who could close his heart to everything and everyone. For the first time in his life, Raymond was forced to confront his own soul, his own weaknesses. And in that moment of complete vulnerability, he made a promise. Not to Mia, not to Alina, but to himself. "I'll make this right. I'll make sure no child ever has to go through this again. I'll fix this for you, Mia. I'll fix it for every child I've failed," he whispered through tears. Mia's eyelids fluttered, her breathing so shallow that for a terrifying moment, Raymond feared he was too late. But then, in a moment that seemed to stretch the very fabric of time, Mia's lips curled into the faintest of smiles. It was small, barely perceptible, but it was enough to give him hope. Her fingers twitched in his grasp, and for the briefest of moments, Raymond felt the weight of her trust, the trust that had been broken, shattered, but now somehow seemed to be repairing, piece by piece. She wasn't just a victim in this moment. She was a symbol of redemption, of change, of the possibility of renewal. Raymond wiped his eyes and held her hand tighter, feeling the heat of her tiny fingers against his skin. His promise had just become something more. It had become a mission, a reason to live better, to build a future where love and responsibility came before anything else. He wasn't sure how he would fix everything, or if Mia would ever fully recover. But in that second, he knew what he had to do. He had to change. He had to be the man who could give Mia the world she deserved. "Mia," he whispered again, his voice full of determination, "you're not alone anymore. I'm here." And for the first time, Raymond truly believed it. As Raymond knelt beside Mia, clutching her fragile hand in his, there was one other presence in the room that couldn't be overlooked. Alina, standing quietly in the background, had been the one who had fought for Mia long before Raymond had stepped into this story. She had been the one to advocate for Mia, to push for medical treatments and legal support, and to give her the care and love she so desperately needed. But what was truly powerful about Alina's sacrifice was that it had never been for any kind of recognition, not even from Mia. Alina had always known that Mia's chance for survival wasn't just in the machines or the doctors. It was in the deep, protective love of someone who truly cared, and that person had always been Alina, despite the odds. While Raymond was busy building his empire, blinded by his own ambitions, Alina was the one who silently poured every ounce of herself into Mia's recovery. She had given up her own career, her own dreams, all for the little girl who had no one else. She took on the immense responsibility of caring for Mia, even when it meant sacrificing her social life, her sleep, and her happiness. No one knew the sleepless nights she had spent by Mia's side, comforting her through the fear, the pain, and the loneliness. No one knew the silent toll it took on her body and soul, the way she had put her own needs aside to give Mia what she never had, a sense of security, of love, and of protection. And yet, when Raymond walked into that ICU room, Alina's presence didn't demand attention. She didn't call out for him to acknowledge her struggles, to thank her for all the work she had done. No, her sacrifice was silent, unnoticed by the world, but it was profound nonetheless. It was in the gentle way she placed a hand on Raymond's shoulder, showing him that she was there, that they were in this together, even though her heart ached knowing how much Raymond had to learn. Raymond, absorbed in his own emotional collapse, didn't immediately see Alina's quiet strength, but over time he began to understand. He realized that while he had been lost in the world of boardrooms and profits, it was Alina who had been there, carrying the weight of Mia's survival, both physically and emotionally. Alina had never expected Raymond to step into Mia's life with grandeur or to give grand speeches. She had known that all she needed was someone who would truly understand the magnitude of sacrifice required to love a child like Mia. As Mia's health began to stabilize, even if just slightly, Alina knew that the hardest part wasn't over. There were still countless medical bills, legal battles, and emotional scars to heal. But she also knew that her sacrifice wasn't just about Mia's survival. It was about giving Raymond the opportunity to change, to open his heart and understand the true meaning of responsibility. Alina was silently placing her trust in him. She didn't need him to fix everything, but she needed him to see the world in a different way, to see the human cost of success and the sacrifice of those who loved. The silence between Raymond and Alina in the ICU spoke volumes. There were no words needed. Alina's quiet resilience had already done the work. It was through her sacrifice that Raymond found the strength to apologize, to promise change, and to finally understand the emotional cost of his life's pursuit of power. In the days that followed, Raymond found himself watching Alina as she continued her care for Mia, doing it without hesitation, without complaint. She never expected anything in return. She simply loved, simply cared, and simply sacrificed, as true love often requires. It was in these quiet, selfless moments that Raymond began to understand the kind of love he had never given himself, the kind that didn't come with strings attached or expectations. One night, as Raymond sat beside Mia's hospital bed, he saw Alina quietly cleaning up the room, tidying the bed and checking the monitors. She moved like a ghost, silently, with such grace. It was in that moment that Raymond realized he had been blind all along. Alina had sacrificed everything for Mia, not for any kind of reward or recognition, but because it was the right thing to do. He stood up, walked quietly over to her, and said nothing at first. He simply put his hand on her shoulder, offering a silent acknowledgement of the sacrifice she had made, one that had changed everything. It was a small gesture, but for Alina it was everything. It was a reminder that her sacrifice had not been in vain, that Raymond, for all his faults, had finally seen her. He had seen her selflessness, and it had awakened something in him. As Raymond sat in the sterile, cold ICU room, his gaze never left Mia. She was unconscious, fragile, her small form covered by the beeping heart monitor. Every beep sounded like a countdown. He wasn't sure if it was counting down to her last breath or a miracle. But one thing was certain. He wasn't going to leave this room without doing everything in his power to change the outcome. His fingers, once so poised and steady in boardrooms, were now trembling, not from fear but from a newfound determination. For the first time in his life, Raymond wasn't thinking about stocks, deals, or numbers. He was thinking about Mia, this little girl who had somehow stolen his heart in the most unexpected of ways. The man who had built his life on commanding power was now filled with a raw sense of protectiveness that he had never known before. He leaned forward, his brow furrowing as he stared at her pale face. Every breath she took seemed like a battle, every moment a fight for survival. How could he have been so blind? His thoughts tortured him. How could I have lived so long without knowing she needed me? Alina, standing at the far corner of the room, could see the change in Raymond. She had witnessed his arrogance before, the man who thought he could control everything. But now, there was something different in the air. It wasn't just regret or guilt. It was the kind of protective fury that only a parent or someone who truly cared could have. Raymond wasn't the man who had walked into this room, the man who had been so disconnected from the real struggles of life. He was someone else now, someone determined to do whatever it took to protect Mia. Alina's eyes softened as she watched him, but she didn't speak. She knew this moment wasn't for words. Raymond was lost in his thoughts, but the fire in his gaze told her everything. He was making a promise to himself. Mia's life mattered. He would fight for her, even if it meant sacrificing every part of the life he had built for himself. The door to the ICU opened softly, and a nurse entered, her face tight with professionalism. She checked the monitors, made some adjustments, but Raymond's presence was too heavy, too commanding for anyone to ignore. He stood up, his voice calm but sharp as he asked, "What more can we do? What are the next steps? How can we ensure Mia survives?" There was no more arrogance in his tone, no more dismissiveness. Every word he spoke was laced with urgency and purpose. It was as if he had become the father he should have been all along, fiercely protective of this child whose life hung by a thread. The nurse hesitated, seeing the change in his demeanor. "We'll keep her comfortable for now. The next few hours are critical. We just have to wait and see how she responds to the treatment." Raymond nodded, his jaw clenched. He wasn't one to sit around and wait. He was used to making things happen. And in this moment, Waiting was the one thing he refused to accept. He turned to Alina, his voice barely above a whisper but filled with a steely resolve. "We can't. Just wait. I'm going to make sure she gets the best treatment. I'll do whatever it takes. Whatever it takes to make sure she pulls through." Alina looked at him, seeing the resolve in his eyes, the protectiveness radiating from him like an invisible shield. She knew it wasn't just about money or power. This was a different kind of commitment, one born from the deepest part of his soul. She nodded, trusting him for the first time. In the days that followed, Raymond's determination only grew. He reached out to the top medical experts, demanded the best care for Mia, and used every resource at his disposal to ensure she would have the fighting chance she deserved. But it wasn't just about the medical care, it was about showing up every single day, sitting by her side, comforting her when the pain became too much, being her rock, even when it seemed like nothing could break through the despair. Mia's recovery, though slow and fragile, started to take shape, and in those small moments when she squeezed his finger or fluttered her eyes open for a brief second, Raymond saw that his protective drive was working. But what he hadn't realized until now was that his protection wasn't just physical, it was emotional. In the quiet moments when Mia was still too weak to speak, Raymond would whisper to her, "You're not alone, Mia. I'll always be here for you. I'm not leaving." But he wasn't just saying it to Mia. He was saying it to himself, making a promise that he would never abandon her again. He would fight, not just for her survival, but for her future, to ensure that she grew up in a world where she would never again face the pain and neglect that had haunted her in the past. Raymond had always lived a life driven by ambition, his eyes focused on the horizon, chasing profits, success, and control. But none of it mattered as he sat in the sterile, cold ICU room, staring at Mia's fragile body. The girl who had been invisible to him for so many years, neglected while he built his empire, was now fighting for her life. His heart tightened as the realization hit him. He had failed her. He had been so consumed with his own world, so blinded by power, that he had allowed this precious little girl to slip through the cracks. His mind raced as regret consumed him. How had he not seen it before? How had he let work and endless meetings overshadow the need for a father's love, for the warmth of a safe home? For Mia, each breath she took seemed like a precious gift, yet he felt like an outsider in her life, a man who had been there in body but absent in every other way. The guilt gnawed at him. Every decision he had made, every moment he had chosen work over, his family flooded back with a sharp sting. He had thought that success would make everything better, that the more money, the more power, the more he could give Mia, the better he was as a father. But now, as he watched the life support machines keeping her alive, he understood. He had failed her. He had failed himself. But amidst the storm of guilt, a shift began to happen within him. Sitting by Mia's side, he realized that his wealth, his power, his influence were meaningless in this moment. None of it mattered if he couldn't be the father she needed. He couldn't change the past, but he could fight for her future. He wouldn't leave her side again, no matter how hard it became. Determined, Raymond vowed silently to himself. He would do whatever it took to ensure that Mia knew, for the rest of her life, that she mattered more than anything in this world. He would be the father she deserved. The days following Mia's collapse were a blur of hospital rooms, doctor visits, and sleepless nights. But as the hours stretched on, Raymond found a new rhythm. He stayed by Mia's side, ignored the phone calls from work, and canceled meetings. For once, he wasn't chasing money or deals. He was chasing her. He wasn't just there to keep her alive. He was there to become the man she needed, the man who had been missing from her life for far too long. His dedication to her recovery was relentless. He spent hours researching medical treatments, speaking with specialists, and ensuring that Mia received the best care possible. But it wasn't just the physical healing he was focused on. He was determined to heal their relationship, to prove to Mia that she wasn't a forgotten casualty in his race for success. And every small victory, every smile from Mia, every sign of life, reminded him that redemption was not just about her survival. It was about him becoming the father he should have always been. In time, as Mia slowly recovered, there were moments where she would squeeze his hand or whisper his name. Each time, Raymond felt the weight of his guilt lighten just a little, as though the love they had once shared was slowly starting to return. Mia still had doubts, still felt the sting of his absence, but in those small moments, Raymond saw something different, a flicker of trust, a flicker of forgiveness. He knew he had a long way to go, but he also knew that the road to redemption was paved with patience, love, and sacrifice. One afternoon, as he sat beside her, Mia's voice was faint, but she whispered, "Dad, don't leave." Her words, small and fragile, cut through him. But in that moment, Raymond knew she was healing. And he was healing too. He wasn't just repairing her body, he was repairing the bond they had lost, the bond that once felt unbreakable. "I'm here, Mia." "I'm not going anywhere," Raymond said softly, his voice cracking. The words felt foreign, but they were the truth. He would never leave her again. For the first time, Raymond didn't need the approval of the boardroom or the applause of colleagues. The only thing that mattered was that Mia knew he would be there for her, no matter what. His past failures didn't define him anymore. His commitment to her did. As Mia recovered, Raymond's transformation became more than just a shift in priorities. It was a rebirth, not just for him, but for their relationship. He realized that he didn't have to be perfect to be a good father. He only had to be there, to love her unconditionally, and to never make the same mistakes again. Raymond learned the true meaning of success. It wasn't about profits or power. It was about family, about love, about being present for those who mattered most. And as he looked at Mia, his daughter, who had fought so hard to survive, he knew that he would spend the rest of his life making sure she would never again feel the weight of his absence. As Raymond sat by Mia's bedside, he could feel the weight of every second dragging on, the sterile air of the hospital room heavy with his thoughts. The machines beeped rhythmically, a constant reminder of how precariously balanced Mia's life was. But something inside Raymond had shifted. He wasn't just a father who had failed, he was a man who refused to fail again. The doctors were guarded in their prognosis, whispering among themselves, their faces serious as they discussed Mia's condition. Her body was frail, and there was a lingering doubt in their eyes that even the best care could guarantee her survival. But Raymond had heard enough. The intensity of their words made his chest tighten. But something else sparked within him. A fire he hadn't felt in years. This was his daughter, his flesh and blood, and he wasn't going to stand by while she slipped away. The suspense of her condition mirrored the chaos brewing in his mind. Would she pull through? Would he be able to do enough to save her? The clock seemed to tick louder in his ears, every minute more agonizing than the last. As Raymond looked at Mia, fighting for every breath, his mind wandered back to his past mistakes. He had spent years focusing on everything but her. Now, with her life hanging in the balance, he knew that no amount of wealth or influence could buy him the time he had wasted. The thought was a chilling one. Could he forgive himself if he lost her now? Could he ever live with the weight of his neglect? It was a moment of truth, the kind that changes everything. As the doctors entered the room, Raymond was faced with their grim expressions. They didn't say much, just that Mia's vitals were fluctuating, that they needed to try something risky. The procedure was experimental, with no guarantees, and the doctors made it clear that it could either help or make things worse. Raymond's heart raced. What if she didn't make it? What if his last memory of her was this fragile, broken girl in a hospital bed? The possibility hit him like a punch to the gut, and for a brief moment he was paralyzed by fear. But then something in him broke free, something he had buried for too long. Determination. He wasn't going to lose her. Not like this. "Do it," Raymond said, his voice steady, though his heart pounded in his chest. "Do whatever it takes." In that moment, his decision was both a suspenseful gamble and an act of pure love. He was putting his trust in the doctors, in the possibility of a solution that had no guarantees, but he was also putting his faith in something even more important, his resolve to never give up on his daughter. As the procedure began, Raymond stepped into the hallway, his hands shaking, his mind running wild with fear and hope. Every second felt like an eternity. Could Mia survive this? Would she be okay? The hours passed slowly, the world outside the hospital window continuing its march forward, indifferent to the drama unfolding in the ICU. But Raymond, for the first time in a long while, wasn't concerned about the outside world. He was living, breathing, praying for this one moment, this one chance to save Mia. Then, as the sun began to set, the doctor emerged, looking exhausted but hopeful. Raymond's breath caught in his throat as the doctor approached him with a look that held both uncertainty and optimism. "She's stable," the doctor said. "We're not out of the woods yet, but the procedure has worked. We're seeing improvements in her vitals." It was the news Raymond had been praying for, and in that moment he felt something deep inside him stir, a sense of purpose and relief that he had not known before. But even more than that, he knew this wasn't just a victory over Mia's health. This was a victory over himself. He had been a man consumed by ambition, by the idea that power and success could solve everything. But now, he understood. True strength wasn't in the boardroom. It wasn't in the numbers or the deals. It was in the quiet moments of sacrifice, in the willingness to give everything for the ones you love. Raymond walked into Mia's room later that evening, his heart full of hope. She was still unconscious, but her breathing was stronger. He sat beside her, holding her hand with a tenderness he had never allowed himself to show before. Tears filled his eyes, but they were tears of gratitude. Mia had fought, and now he was going to fight for her. As he gazed down at her, Raymond realized that this journey wasn't just about her recovery, it was about his own transformation. The past was gone, but he still had a chance. And in that quiet moment, with Mia's hand in his, he understood what it meant to truly be a father. The inspirational moment came later, as Mia slowly woke up, her eyes fluttering open. She looked up at Raymond, confusion flickering in her gaze before recognition set in. A weak smile tugged at her lips. She reached out, her small fingers grasping his hand, her voice hoarse but clear. "Dad, you stayed." Raymond swallowed the lump in his throat, unable to speak for a moment. But when he finally did, his voice was filled with something he hadn't had in years. Hope. "I'm here, Mia. I'm never leaving you again. I'll stay for every moment, every minute of your life." It wasn't just the recovery of her body. It was the recovery of their relationship, of Raymond's heart. that had been so lost for so long. In that moment, hope wasn't just a feeling. It was a promise, one that he would spend the rest of his life keeping. As days turned into weeks, Mia's condition slowly improved. The small victories were enough to keep Raymond going, even when the days felt long and the nights uncertain. He stayed by her side, watching her fight, witnessing her resilience. With every step she took toward recovery, Raymond felt like he was healing too. One morning, as sunlight filtered through the hospital window, Mia opened her eyes fully, and for the first time in what felt like forever, she smiled. It wasn't a weak, hesitant smile. It was a genuine smile that radiated warmth and a sense of strength. In that moment, Raymond knew she was going to be okay. The doctors had told him it would take time, that Mia's recovery would be a slow and gradual process, but seeing her now, he saw something more than just physical healing. He saw the restoration of the bond that had been broken for so long. Raymond stood at the foot of her bed, watching her as she sat up, a little unsteady, but determined. "I'm sorry," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry for not being there, Mia, for all the years I wasn't there. But I'm here now, and I'll always be here." Mia looked at him with a softness in her eyes that Raymond hadn't seen before. There was no anger, no resentment, just a quiet understanding between them. She reached out her hand, and without a word, he took it, feeling the weight of the moment settle deep into his heart. "I know, Dad," Mia said, quietly, her voice shaky but filled with sincerity. "I know you're here now, and that's all that matters." Her hand squeezed his, a silent promise that they would move forward together, not bound by the mistakes of the past, but united in the hope of a better future. Raymond felt the flood of emotions rush through him: relief, gratitude, love. But more than anything, he felt something that had eluded him for years: clarity. The lessons he had learned through Mia's illness, through his own transformation, became crystal clear. Success was never about power or wealth. It was about the people you love and the choices you make to show them you care. In the weeks that followed, Mia's recovery progressed steadily. Raymond found himself in a place he had never been before, no longer consumed by the pressure to succeed or the need to be in control. Instead, he focused on being a present father, a father who showed up, who listened, who sacrificed. He didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. His life, his purpose, was in his daughter, and he had finally realized that he was enough, just as he was. As the doctors discharged Mia from the hospital, the world outside felt different. The noise of the city, the endless meetings, and the chase for success all seemed far away. Raymond stood beside Mia as they left the hospital, her small hand in his. The sun was shining brightly, and for the first time in years, he felt truly at peace. They didn't need anything more than each other. In that moment, Raymond understood that love was the greatest success of all, and no amount of money or power could ever compare to the bond he had with Mia. Their relationship was still fragile, still healing, but it was real. It was enough. It was more than enough. As they walked toward the car, Mia looked up at him and said, "Dad, you're staying with me tonight, right?" Raymond smiled, his heart swelling with an emotion he had never truly known until now. "I'm staying with you forever, Mia. I'm not going anywhere." And in that moment, surrounded by the noise of the city and the warmth of the sun, Raymond knew that this was the beginning of something new. A future built on love, trust, and the unwavering belief that no matter what happened, they would face it together, washed over him. The past was gone, but the future was theirs to shape. And for the first time in his life, Raymond was ready to embrace it with open arms. Real and unshakable took root in his heart. They had both survived the darkest of times, and now, together, they would create something beautiful, something that no mistake, no failure could ever take away. This was their second chance, and Raymond was determined to make it count. For Mia, for himself, and for the life they would build together.